On today's episode of Scratch, I'm going to teach you how to make one of my favorites, sausage gravy and biscuits. On today's episode, I'm going to teach you how to make some delicious, fluffy baking powder biscuits. I like them better than a buttermilk biscuit. I'll tell you why later. I'm also going to show you how to make homemade sausage that we're going to pair with a white gravy to make sausage gravy and biscuits. Now, I'm from the South, so I love anything that's really filling, that's bad for you, and that you can eat any time of day. This is one of my favorite meals. It's one of my favorite things to make. It's not something that we find very often in Canada, and anytime I make it for people, the name kind of sounds a little funny, but they fall in love with it because it's so good. So we're going to start out with our biscuits. We're going to put 2 cups of flour in our bowl, and then we're going to get some cooled margarine or shortening. You're going to need half a cup of this. The cooler it is, the better it's going to actually end up making your biscuits a little bit more flaky. So we're going to put that into our flour. And then we're just going to use our pastry cutter, and we're going to cut that flour in. If you don't have a pastry cutter, you can use 2 knives, or sometimes I've used a fork. I've also heard of people that put it in a blender or in a food processor of some sort, and you just want it so that the butter is evenly distributed through the flour, and it actually kind of forms like a, I don't know, pasty, sandy mixture. I think they say pea size is the recommended size. I just do it until it looks pretty well. You don't want any big chunks remaining. Shortening is the preferred fat. If you want a more golden biscuit, you can use butter. I recommend staying away from margarine. I think I said margarine earlier. I recommend staying away from margarine. It just doesn't cook up quite as nice as shortening or butter. So now that we have that, so that's all nice and mixed. We're going to use our pastry cutter there. Clean that off. So that's done. And you're going to end up with a nice consistency there. So that's about what it's going to look like. It's going to look a little bit like a cake mix or something like that. So to that, we're going to add a tablespoon of baking powder and a tablespoon of sugar. You don't want these to be too sweet. And a teaspoon of salt. I like to use a little bit more than a teaspoon. You can use a teaspoon and a half. It just helps. I really like salt, and so it helps in the final product. It makes it a lot more, in my mind, it helps make it a little bit more tasty. I don't have to put as much salt on them. So we're just going to mix that in again with our pastry cutter. I'm lazy. I don't want to wash a spoon or another spatula if I don't have to. So I'm just going to use my pastry cutter and mix it in there. You can mix it with your hands, or you can mix it with a spoon or a spatula, whatever you want to mix it with. All right. So once that's all mixed, we're going to take 3/4 of a cup of milk, and we're going to pour that right in the middle of it. We'd made a little well, so we pour that in there, and this is where it really gets fun. So we're going to mix that in, and I've set aside about 1/4 of a cup of flour because we're going to need that once we turn the biscuits out. You want to preheat your oven to 450 degrees, and you don't want to overmix this mixture. It's going to seem like it doesn't want to come together. You're going to get a little bit on your hands. And just as it finally starts to come together, you're going to dump it out onto the counter. So we're going to dump that there. And you see it's really, really crumbly. That's exactly how we want it. We're going to get that off our hands. We're just going to knead it just a little bit. And we're going to spread a little bit of this 1/4 cup of flour on the counter. So we want it nice and crumbly. That's going to make really good flaky biscuits. I'm going to spread a little bit of flour on top. So any pastry you make, you want to keep the top of it nice and, I don't know if you call it lubricated because it's not really fat, but the flour helps so your cutter doesn't stick. You can use a cookie cutter. You can use pretty much anything depending on the size of biscuits. And you can see I'm leaving my dough quite thick here. The thicker you leave the dough, the thicker it's going to rise. I've learned that about 1/4 inch to 3/4, about 1/4 of an inch to 1/2 an inch rather, is going to be a good thickness for these. And they're going to rise up. They're going to triple in height, so they're going to be nice and tall. We can fit about 8 to 10 of these on a pan. And like I said, I like them nice and big, so that when I put my gravy on them, I have a nice little meal there. So once you cut those out, if there's no more room, we're just gonna gather our dough. We're not gonna knead it back in or anything like that. I'm just gonna roll it out about that same thickness. A few years ago, I found these silicone rings online that you can put on a rolling pin to make your dough uniform, whether you're making like cookies or biscuits or anything you have to roll out. Not sure where they ended up. I haven't seen them in a while, and if your biscuits fall apart a little bit, that's okay. It's gonna add to the flakiness of them. So we're gonna roll out one last one. You can squish it a little bit if it's just not quite staying together enough. We're gonna have to, my pan's not quite big enough. I've made my biscuits too big. That's okay. I like big biscuits. So our last one here, we're gonna roll that out. We'll cut this one. And you'll notice I haven't even had to flour my cup that I'm using. This dough that I make has enough fat in it that you don't have to actually do that. And you can actually put your biscuits quite close on your pan. They're not going to expand horizontally as much. They'll expand vertically. So our oven's at 450. You got a little bit of dough left over. You can cook that. You can eat it if you want. It's not very good. But we're going to pop these into the oven at 450 degrees for about 10 to 12 minutes. We're going to wait for them to rise. They're going to rise up and they're going to start to get golden brown on the top. That's how you'll know they're done. If you take them out a little bit too early, they're going to be doughy on the inside. You don't want that. Let them get a little bit brown. And then while these are in the oven, we're going to make our gravy. I usually make my gravy, I guess, while these are in the oven, so that by the time these come out, the gravy's done, everything's done at the same time. So we'll pop these into the oven. For 10 minutes. And we'll see you in a little bit. So we've left our biscuits in. They needed about 12 minutes. So there they are. They've rised up quite a bit. And if you pull them apart, they're really hot. Well, I won't do it. But if you pull them apart, you can see how nice and fluffy they are on the inside. And that'll pair really well with the sausage gravy we're about to make. So the next step in our sausage gravy is to actually make the sausage. I've searched high and low since I've been to Canada to try and find a really good breakfast sausage like what I was used to growing up in the southern United States. I just haven't found anything that I really love. And so anytime we would go to the States, we would buy sausage. But I finally came across a recipe that's almost identical to my favorite sausage. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna start out with a pound of ground pork. And then we're gonna add to that a teaspoon of salt. And all these are just recommended measurements. Play with it and see what you like, because you may want more or less than that. That's a half a teaspoon of parsley. And then you're gonna add a quarter teaspoon of all the following. So you're gonna add a quarter teaspoon of sage, a quarter teaspoon of ground pepper. I like extra sage and extra pepper in mine. A quarter teaspoon of thyme, a quarter teaspoon of crushed red pepper flakes. You're gonna add a quarter teaspoon of coriander. It's not something I cook with regularly. I just happened to have it on hand when I tried this recipe. And so now it's something that's a regular staple, and I'm gonna try and find more ways to incorporate that into our recipes. And then there's an optional quarter teaspoon of cayenne pepper. It gives it a lot of heat. I really like a hot sausage. My kids don't really seem to care for it as much, but I'm the one that cooks and I'm the one that makes it, so they get hot sausage. There is a variant you can do on this that is more of a sweeter sausage. So this is really good as a ground sausage, but you can also form it into patties. You could do, if you wanted to do like links, you could form it into links. But a lot of people like a sweet breakfast sausage. So instead of all these spices, if you just add 3 tablespoons of maple syrup, a teaspoon of salt, and a quarter teaspoon of coriander to your recipe, that'll make a really good sweet breakfast sausage. So we're just gonna mix that all up. We're gonna put it in the fridge for an hour covered. You wanna let it rest for at least an hour so that it can really absorb all those flavors. And this also freezes really well.
brown the sausage over a medium-high heat. Love that sizzle. We like to keep the drippings from cooking your sausage as the fat for the gravy. You need some sort of fat. We always love to use that. Sometimes we'll add in bacon grease that we've saved, or you could use butter, but we like to brown our sausage and use that fat. So we're just going to brown this off, keep it into small pieces, and we'll come back and show you how to make gravy after that.
So now our sausage is browned, we're ready to make our gravy. We're just going to leave the sausage in the pan. I've experimented both ways with taking the sausage out and with leaving it in. It works just as good to leave it in. So I'm just going to put that in there with a half a cup of butter. We're going to let the butter melt. Like Devin said before, a lot of times we'll use the bacon fat or sausage grease. I know it sounds disgusting, but that's what makes this so delicious. We're going to turn our heat down just a notch. We don't want our butter to burn. We're going to get that nice and melted. And you want to scrape the bottom of your pan good, especially if you're using a stainless steel pan like this, because that's where all your good, once that meat caramelizes, that's when you get that good flavor. So once all your butter's melted, we're going to add the same portion, so a half a cup of flour. We're going to add that in there. And we're going to get that nice and stirred around. You're going to let this sit for just a little bit. You want to get it nice and mixed, and you want to let it brown. You want that nice kind of off-white color in your final product. And to this mix, we're going to add a little bit of ground mustard, so about 1/8 of a teaspoon of ground mustard, and salt and pepper to taste. And remember, your sausage already has lots of flavor on it, so you may not need to add lots of salt. You may not need to, but I usually do because I love salt. We're going to add lots of pepper. I like a nice peppery gravy. In fact, a lot of places in the States, that's what this is called. It's called pepper gravy. Just a white gravy. You don't even put sausage in it sometimes, and they'll put it on lots of stuff. Vegetables or potatoes or whatever. This gravy product is kind of a weird product. It's unique to the U.S. Some people think it's weird.
Yeah, some of us do think it's weird. When we were dating, we went out to a restaurant and Brian ordered sausage, biscuits, and gravy. And I must have given you the weirdest look ever because that sounded absolutely revolting to me. So in my mind, I'm thinking like sausages that you would cut up and eat, like a big sausage.
Like a bratwurst kind of thing, yeah.
And then I'm thinking brown gravy and biscuits, and I can't figure out how on earth those three things could ever go together. And then it arrives, and he orders it, and it arrives, and it's this white, weird mixture, and it still looks disgusting to me, and I'm thinking there's no way that that can be good.
So now that this is brown, we're going to add 4 cups of milk. So this is actually a four times recipe. So the original recipe calls for a cup of milk, 2 tablespoons of butter, and 2 tablespoons of flour. We multiplied it by 4, so that's where we get those measurements. Carry on.
Thank you. So I still have to say it looks disgusting. I don't admit that I'm wrong very often. Well, I'm not wrong very often, but I was wrong because this is amazing, and it is one of our very favorite staples in our family. Another variation that we make of this is Brian does this amazing casserole. So it's the same elements that you're seeing here, but we add in eggs and milk mixture to it. It makes like an omelet.
So you put the biscuits on the bottom of like a 9x13 casserole pan. You kind of cut them up so they fit nice, but there's still room in between them. And then you scramble up some eggs, like 4 to 6 eggs. Scramble them up, put a little bit of milk in with them. Like don't cook them, scramble them up, like whisk them up in a bowl, and you dump that over top, and then you put melted or shredded cheese over that. And then you pour your gravy on top of all that, and just for good measure, because we love cheese, we put more cheese on top.
We get that brown, yummy.
You bake it in the oven, and oh my goodness, it is heaven. It'll fill you up for 3 days though. One thing to remember with this gravy is you got to keep stirring it. Some people like using a whisk. I just keep it moving and just keep rubbing the bottom of the pan. Make sure you get all the spots in the pan. And it's going to thicken up pretty quick. You don't want your heat too high. You don't want this to boil. If for some reason it's not thickening up, you probably didn't use enough flour. And what you can do is you can add a tablespoon of flour and about 2 tablespoons of milk. Whisk that up before you put it in, dump it in. If you just add flour to it, it ends up getting mealy and it kind of pills on the top and it changes your consistency. So if for some reason, like, just let it do its thing, it'll go. But you can see we've got this nice, rich, kind of off-white color. There's a layer of grease and fat on the top, which is delicious. That's where all your flavor comes from. Honestly, this is one of my favorite things. You know, they always ask that question, like, if you have one thing to eat for the rest of your life, what would you eat?
It would be this.
Biscuits and gravy.
And bacon.
And bacon. Well, that goes without saying.
Yeah. So we're gonna let this thicken up, and then we'll show you how we serve it over some biscuits.
And you better watch quick, because it's going to go fast, because I eat this stuff like it's going out of style. I love it. So we're back here, we've got our biscuits on the plate, we've had them out of the oven for a little bit. We've now got our gravy over here, it's thickened up as it's cooled, and we're gonna show you how you eat it, because I guess people wouldn't know how to eat it. So the way I like to do is I just break my biscuit in half. Some people crumble theirs up and do them in small pieces. I like to just shove a biscuit in my mouth and get her done. So
Those are perfect.
So we're gonna put that there, and we're gonna slather them with gravy.
Don't be shy. Oh.
You'll seriously want to lick gravy off your plate.
Yeah. I'll let you do your own, because
Thank you.
don't want to do it wrong.
So Devin tried putting these in a bowl. Biscuits and gravy don't go in a bowl. If you put them in a bowl, you're wrong.
Or Canadian, probably.
Or Canadian, which would make you wrong.
Oh.
All right. There's a reason this is my favorite thing to eat.
Yeah, it's so good.
So good.
Yum. Good job.